Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fifth lesson of the course Grassroots Activism and Lawyering for Migrants' Rights. Today's lesson is titled Seeking Asylum in the Climate Crisis and is thus dedicated to the issue of the so-called climate or environmental refugees. This is, of course, a very hot topic, and it is a topic of great interest from a legal point of view because it raises several issues regarding the legal recognition of this category of refugees, and of course, with regard to the protection of their fundamental rights and the access to a form of international protection. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting the second guest speaker of the course, Andrea Grieco, whom I thank for being here with us and who I'm going to introduce very quickly. Andrea is head of strategy at A-World, the UN official platform to support Act Now, the United Nations campaign for individual action on climate change and sustainability. In the last year, he has managed the sustainability area at Will Media, a young startup working with the goal of involving everyone in the great changes of our time and being part of it for a better politics, economy, a better world, let's say. He was chosen by the United Nations Foundation as Young Ambassador of the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda, and by the European Commission as European Climate Pact Ambassador. He also works with Amnesty International Task Force Human Rights Observer, a program for monitoring and documentation of human rights violations in Italy and in accordance with Sustainable Development Goals of the Agenda 2030. I'm very happy that Andrea accepted our invitation to give this lesson. So I leave him the floor, and I thank him again very much for being here and for having accepted to participate in our project. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Cara. Thank you, everybody. I'm very, very happy to be there tonight, talking with a very important theme about the future we want. The future we want is the main slogan of the Agenda 2030. So this is a little preview. The Agenda 2030 is the agenda created by the United Nations created for a new world, a new sustainable world against climate change and world inequalities to fight climate change. The Agenda 2030 was composed by 13 goals and several sub-goals. And in the Agenda 2030 also we talked about the climate refugees, because the climate refugees is the start of this talk. This lesson is the text we read. Climate refugees is the next obliged to migrate will be us, because the climate change and extreme weather, rising seas and damages ecosystem could threat the safety and livelihood of a billion of people. And so today a collective effort is needed to find solution to climate change, to help climate change refugees, the world forgotten victims of climate change. Because there could be there could be 1.2 billion climate refugees by 2050. So this is called by the Great Displacer, because climate refugees are people who left their home, their countries, and going to another country to ask new rights, a new possibility, economic possibility, a new possibility to develop their life. So this is the average number of internal climate migrants, because the climate migrants starts for internal migration, is not international migration. So the climate migrants are at starting point internal climate refugees, but now for the effects, the very strong effects of climate change, the migrants of climate change are international migrants. So come from every part of the world. So, but who are the climate refugees? The term of climate refugees has been used since 1985, when the UN Environmental Program expert Essam El Hahibi defined climate or environmental refugees as people who have been forced to leave their traditional habitat temporarily or permanently because of made by climate and environmental disruption. So, but the extent of this definition still causes some confusion, because now we defined. So okay, no wait. Okay, there. So because we have a lot of people who live the effect of climate change and around the world, and we have a lot of people who escape from their home to find a new solution, a new protection in the other countries. So when two categories for hurricanes hit, for example, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador in November, in the past November, people poured across the border into Mexico and headed towards the USA as torrential rains and landslides. They lost their homes, livelihoods, and access to clean water. In this case, the effects are clear. It is easy to see how conditions in their home countries caused by climate change, extreme weather, lead people to cross border as a climate refugees. So this is this is not like a domino effect of climate change, because climate change does not just pose a threat by causing immediate harm to people and infrastructure. It is also a long-term danger that can slowly destabilize societies and economies, making them more vulnerable to other threats. So, for example, the sea level rise. So, for a reason, in the situation is made as a this situation is a very interconnected situation, because the effecto domino is when we have a effect of climate change in the part of the world, in the another part of the world we have another effects. So the poverty, the absence of water, on food now are connected to climate change and are the first cases of climate migration. The domino effects is a real correlation, but between conflicts and climate change. Over the past 30 years, the number of people living in coastal areas at a high risk of rising sea levels has increased, so has increased, and the 90% of whom are from poor developing countries, because climate change is not democratic. The people who lived in more developing countries suffer a lot of the climate change and the climate change effects. Also, in this country, we have a lot of climate refugees, more than the rich country. When temperature rise in a country, for instance, it can reduce water availability and water quality. This may increase the spread of disease and raise the likelihood of those leading to crop failures that will reduce income and food supplies. So the reduction of water and water quality come to food supplies and come to life of people. So we have a real correlation between conflicts and climate change, because if people don't have food and don't have water, people don't have rights. If people don't have rights, people want rights. And to have rights, people create people live in a social crisis. So in the social crisis, we have a lot of conflicts, social conflicts, and internal conflicts. For example, the Syrian conflicts, the press, the international press, the NGO, the United Nations talk about this conflict like a conflict, so a humanitarian conflict, a humanitarian crisis. But the real thing is that the Syria conflict, they had a very human cost, a huge cost, and in death of people, but also this type of conflicts are connected by climate change, because the domino effect was in Syria, was felt in Syria, where desertification of formerly fertile farmer income a lot, and so as people don't have the people don't have food, don't have water, and the people in the rural workers moved to the city. When people move to the city are not prepared by this huge number of people. So the city aren't prepared to create a new job for these people. So for that reason, we come internal crisis, internal conflicts, because those left behind facing poverty and were an easy target for Islamic State, for example, in Syria. So these are not the only factors that lead to Syrian civil war, but in the context of the Arab Spring and increasingly strict restriction from the Syrian governments, societal issues caused by climate change worked to exacerbate by existing tensions and problems. The result was a conflict, the worst refugees crisis in a decade, with around 6 million Syrian forced to flee their country. So the Syria experience, the experience in Syria is sadly not unusual, as there is a strong correlation between countries most vulnerable to climate change and those experiencing conflicts or violence. According to the United Nations Agency for Refugees, and according to this report of the United Nations Agency for Refugees, the global trends for displacement in 2 years ago, we had the 95% of our conflict displacement occurred in countries of vulnerable or high vulnerable to climate change. So this is a data who tell us the situation, the world situation about the conflict and about the countries who these conflicts are made, and the country, more vulnerable country, to also to the climate change. Because when a conflict, when we start a conflict in a vulnerable country, this country don't take the instrument to help the population to move forward the conflict, don't have the instrument, the political, the economic and societal instrument to help people to fight climate change. So the maps overlap, and the climate crisis too, thinking about climate, thinking about Syrian conflicts. The good news in this scenario is that international governments are starting in part to recognize climate migration as an issue that need to be fight. So in November in 2021, USA President Joe Biden released a report on the impact of climate change on migration. So the White House report represents the first time the USA government has officially recognized a link between climate change and migration. This report recognized that climate migration can have significant implication for international security, instability, conflicts, and geopolitics. And it called for the development of strategies that would allow the human, safe, and proactive management of climate migration flows. So there are two numbers. There are 30 million of people, 41 people per minute, are people who escape from their countries because lived in a country, in a state who suffered the climate change effects. The climate 31 people per minute are the climate refugees today, just until the last report of the United Nations. So on the way what can be done to help climate refugees? So we have a lot of things to do to help climate refugees, but after the solution, just one moment, because okay. after the solution to have climate refugees, I want to talk to you about a problem, because climate refugees ask when people are a refugee, so people left their home and going in another country. When people come to another country, ask seek asylum, but the seeking asylum in the climate crisis is very, very difficult. The solution is to deny this asylum, because people who left their home for climate problem, for climate change, are not recognized by the humanitarian law and the international law. So climate change refugees need to access to the same protected status offered by the other refugees, and such as those who have escaped conflicts. So, but the situation is there. The Geneva Convention define refugee status on the basis of a well-founded fear or being persecuted for a reason of a race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. Clearly, these conditions do not include environmental reasons from a perspective of international law. Climate refugees do not exist. And any responsibility for the primary protection of climate refugees rests in the national governments. So in order to delve into the issues, must first know the distinction between refugees and internal displaced people. Because the internally displaced people, meaning like persons of a group of persons who have been forced or coerced to flee or abandon their home or place or habitual residence, in order to avoid the effects of armed conflict, situation of generalized violence, human rights violation, or man-made natural disaster, and who have not crossed international recognized state borders. A refugee, on the other hand, is a person who has been forced to leave his or their country and has no intention of returning. The Geneva Convention define refugee status on a basis of a well-being-founded fear, and clearly this condition not include the condition of the Geneva Convention for refugees, international refugees, do not include environmental refugees, and usually include people who have left their home territory due to the climate crisis, as long as they do not leave the states. So climate change affects the interplanet and is not confined by borders, but the definition of refugees are very, very confined by borders, are very, very strict by borders and national borders. So for that reason, now, today, we are in international law who don't recognize the climate refugees, don't recognize the rights of these people to have a new life in another country. No, this is the solution. So this is the what are the climate refugees? The climate refugees are the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees points out that the developing regions, which are among the most climate vulnerable, are home to the world refugees. Extreme weather events and absorbed in these refuge hosting regions are disrupting their lives, exacerbating their humanitarian needs, and haven't forcing them to flee again. The focus at the moment is primarily on the natural disaster, and it was felt that future specification will not be all helpful in ensuring a greater protection from displaced person. The displaced person are in fact defined as a representative of climate-related displacement, a qualification that allows, for example, the application of guidelines principle on internal displacement. And these guidelines are not obligation, but the primary, as we say, the primary protection lies with national governments, and there is no recognition of the state of international law. So the type of migration linked to climate change is the so this is a very topic, the link by migration and climate change. This is why the United Nations, the European Union, and other entities are trying to adjust the focus and introduce the environmental migrants. The International Organization for Migration, for example, lamenting the lack of a globally accepted definition for people moving for environmental reason, has recently issued the working definition of environmental migrants. Environmental migrants, so according to the International Organization for Migration, proposal are person or group or person who, because of sudden or progressive change in their environment, they have a negative impact of their lives or living condition, are forced to leave their home and temporarily or permanently, and move within the territory or abroad. So by the International Organization of Migration, on admission, an attempt to capture the complexity of the issues. The definition of environmental migrants recognize that this type of migrants do not only displace due to the extreme climate events, but also due to the slow deterioration of environmental condition. So movements can occur both within and outside national borders, and the migration can be both short-term and long-term. To the other side, environmentally driven movements can be either forced or determined by choice. So the implication of the term, deprived of the implication of the term refugees, the deliberately bold the definition of environmental migrants indicates that human mobility related to the climate crisis can take many forms: temporary or permanent, forced or voluntary, internal or international, individual or collective. So for the International Organization of Migration, IOM, migration can be caused for both slow process, exacerbated, and the sudden events. So, for example, cyclones, tsunamis, etc. Exacerbated inter alia but the adverse effects of climate change. Over the years, new definitions have been given, some of them with legal force, such as those of the Cancun agreements. The latter distinguished three different types of climate change, included mobility, displacement, migration, and planned relocation. So the disaster displacement is the first, and the disaster displacement is caused by situation where people are forced to leave their homes, or because of a disaster, or to avoid the impact of an immediate of natural hazard. The United Nations Agency for Refugees identify specific type of assistance that organizations and governments can provide. So activity to reduce and prevent the negative impacts created by the environmental disaster, technical and legal support to areas affected by natural disaster, and promotion of policies and new research to support affected countries. So the second one is the climate migration. The climate migration, we talked a lot about this type of the migration, described a movement of people connected by a sudden or progressive events due to a climate crisis. It is it is therefore to be understood as a subcategory of environmental migration, referring to an event more immediately attributable to climate change. The last one, definition of the migration by climate change migration by the Cancun agreements, is the planned relocation. So the planned relocation, on the other hand, occurs in the context of disaster or environmental degradation, included those caused by the effects of climate change. A planned process in which people or group of people move or are assisted in moving from their home to the new places and are given the condition to rebuild their life. Planned relocation should be understood as a long process to be implemented in all aspects of people's lives until they no longer have needs or vulnerabilities related to displacement. It is a common phenomenon, especially in some atolls where rising sea level already make human life impossible. So human mobility so now going to the conclusion, the first part of the lesson, but human mobility is a generic expression covering all different forms of movement of people. So is like an umbrella summarizing the previous one. So we talk about three different categories of people who moved for climate change, climate migration, planned relocation, and disaster displacement. So the reason why the term climate refugees in climate refugees should be avoided and is very, very important, because according to the global internal displacement, we have a lot. Okay, so according this the global this report, the 95% of people displaced for conflicts are displaced by climate change, by any reason connected to climate change. So these people now are climate refugees, but also are people who live in very difficult states, and are into starting their migration are internal displaced people. So this is very important to recognize this also this change in the climate migration, because when we talk about climate migration, we don't talk a lot, we don't talk more about on internal displacement, but we talk on this is very important, because we talk in a way, in an international way. So so depending in the future, depending on how catastrophic the estimates are, there could be several 100 million people voluntary or forcibly migrating for environmental reasons alone. So for the consequences of climate change, and for the international level, still non-TAVE today a description or definition of a group of people we call climate refugees, and we are not sure this is the that this is the right term to describe the association of the word refugee with climate or environmental is often used by media or activists to draw attention to people affected by disaster and climate change. But although their needs are often similar to those of refugees, the organization we view is that the terms climate refugees and environmental refugees should be avoided. In addition to having no legal basis, they fail to recognize key aspects of population movements on the basis and of the climate crisis, such as the fact that climate migration is predominantly internal and now external, and not necessary for the two types of the migration, not necessary first. The focus on climate refugees in the media also obscure the vulnerability of all those people who, despite living in areas of serious environmental risk, are unable to move. And this is referred to as a trait population, a notion that's applied particularly to those who are unable to move due to the lack of resource, disability, or social reason, for example, gender issues, or who choose not to leave their homeland for cultural reasons. So for that reason, it's very important today to talk about climate refugees, internal and international climate refugees, and it's important also to recognize the first action to recognize these categories at the international level, like, for example, an action plan on integration and inclusion to the European Commission, who talked about the role of climate change in the dynamics of the migration from the Africa. So, but now I think it's time to a little break. I don't know if you
as
want.
You prefer, Andrea, as you prefer.
Yeah,
I think it's
yeah, but
it's good to have a 10 minutes break because
we have a lot of notion.
Yeah, a lot of the lesson is very intense and following through a screen is always tough, you know, but as you prefer.
Okay, no, yeah. Let's go in a short break. So
here are just 3 questions, but we can respond them after all the lessons in the last 15 minutes. So other people can join with other questions, and if someone want to do some question online, they can do. It will be better.
Okay. Yeah.
See you in 10 minutes in 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Eccoci.
There we are.
Yeah.
Dimmi se delle volte mi sembra che mi perda, bloccatemi, perché io non vedo nessuno. Se mi fate ok.
In realtà, the other people that you can see them because they have the video and the audio blocked for that.
Ah, okay.
So if someone wants to ask some question, we can open them, the audio, and they can speak.
Ok.
No, ma comunque non direi proprio che si è verificata questa ipotesi. Comunque in caso non ti preoccupare.
Ottimo. Tra l'altro stavo guardando anche le domande, ce ne sono, vedo che in una state rispondendo forse.
Ma sì, io stavo provando a dare un'ipotesi, cioè insomma una lettura, ma non una risposta, perché risposte difficile darne.
Non ce ne sono.
Esatto.
No, però le altre le possiamo rispondere, assolutamente le rispondiamo.
Vuoi rispondere adesso o dopo?
No, non lo so, possiamo anche finire e poi magari...
Ok, infatti
no, possiamo anche rispondere adesso, dai, magari può essere interessante, perché una delle due, cioè nel senso, una delle due è connessa poi alle conclusioni di fatto, cioè alla fine.
Ok. When you want to start again, feel free to start.
Yes. So, just wait. I just do the presentation. So, a very short resume. We talked in the first part of this lesson. We talked about prendo la presentazione. Okay. Okay. So in the first part of this lesson, we talked about the phenomena of climate refugees and the domino effect about the climate change and the refugees and displacement, displace of people due to climate change. The numbers are very high, and we talked about the domino effects about the climate change problems in the human rights violation by the refugees. We talked also about the definition of the climate refugees and internal displacement, internal displaced people, and the number of the people today. Also, we start to talk about the situation of the international law, because the international law don't recognize the climate change, the climate refugees, and don't recognize the protection of these people because these people are not included in the Geneva Convention. So the situation is that the asylum, when we present a question of asylum due to climate change for our people are denied. So now, before we have two questions, and we talked about this topic, the non-refoulement regime of the Article 3, because wait, okay. because climate change as a trigger or a non-refoulement obligation and international human rights law. For example, the recently published the decision of the United Nations Human Rights Committee offer a very important insight into how the international legal system is coming to address climate change displacement. TETIOTA, the TETIOTA versus New Zealand. This is the cause, the individual communication. TETIOTA is significant for its recognition that climate change impacts affecting migrants in their states of origin can trigger obligation of non-refoulement binding of states they enter. The Human Rights Committee, United Nations Human Rights Committee, expounded on the effect of climate change on migrants' rights to life under Article 6 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and provide guidelines on how the applicable test of a real risk of irreparable harm is to be deployed in this novel context. The Human Rights Committee decision concerned a compliant route under the ICCPR, first optional protocol, and by Loiani TETIOTA, a Kiribati national, against New Zealand. TETIOTA applied for asylum in New Zealand on the basis that the climate change affecting and affects today Kiribati exposed himself and his family to inter alia violent land disputes, a lack of fresh drinking water, an inability to sustain a livelihood via agriculture due to soil salinization and flooding. The New Zealand Immigration and Protection Tribunal, considering both the Refugees Convention and the ICCPR, rejected his application. So TETIOTA was removed to Kiribati in September 2015, and his family also reunited from New Zealand. So his complaint agreed is removal placed New Zealand in breach of this of his Article 6 right to life. The question before was whether it could depart from New Zealand's findings to hold that TETIOTA was exposed to a real risk of irreparable harm of his right to life in Kiribati. So for that reason, the non-refoulement in this case is applied. And also another important takeaway is TETIOTA's demonstration of how a real risk of irreparable harm to an individual's right to life is to be ascertained. The Human Rights Committee required New Zealand to have ensured there was no reasonably foreseeable risk to TETIOTA's right to life. Also, the Human Rights Committee's invocation of its foreseeability standard in previous non-refoulement decision has been inconsistent. TETIOTA indicates that it may feature more heavily in future Human Rights Committee reasoning. So this case is a very important case to explain the non-refoulement law and definition is applied to climate refugees, and it's possible to apply the non-refoulement right to the climate refugees. We have also, I don't know if you have another question, but yeah, we have another 2 questions, but now we talk about the second part, because it's very connected to the other 2 questions, because we talked about the the maps we overlap, and the climate crisis too, and the scale, so climate refugees don't have protection for international law today, and we need to protect these people, and we use the new and existing legal pathway for individuals displaced by climate change. The process and framework currently available to address individuals displaced by climate change include an extensive list of partnership, commission, conventions, standards, and cross-cutting agendas. But our international law still has no clear mechanism or legally binding solution for these individuals. And the following sections address the different scales of protection currently available, including at international, regional, and individual country levels. The international, so we have 3 responses: the international response, the regional, and the individual country level. The international response as a clear international framework that regulates the protection of individuals displaced by climate change is yet to develop. The international community has taken several steps in recognizing the importance of climate-induced displacement in the last decade. For example, we had in the dimension of the international response, we have the Nansen initiative launched by the Norwegian and Swiss government. It was the one of the first initiative that focused on recognizing and protecting individual displaced by climate change at the international level. The initiative involved regional consultation with governments and the civil society actors, including in the Pacific, the Horn of Africa, the Central America, the Southeast Asia, and the South of Asia. Their efforts result is a non-binding agenda endorsed by 100 states to fill the legal protection gap for individual displaced by climate change. Also, in this dimension of the international dimension, we have the task force on displacement created by United Nations Framework Convention of the Climate Change on Climate Change, UNFCCC, currently represent the most advanced example of a broad global policy framework integrating human mobility and climate change dimension. In its first phase, the task force developed a set of comprehensive recommendations to avert and minimize and address displacement related to the adverse impact of climate change. In the second phases, The task force objective is to implement SACO recommendation, including developing national and subnational legislation, policies, and strategies to reduce climate-induced displacement and move on in a research, in a data collection, risk analysis, and information sharing to understand and manage human mobility driven by climate change. The Global Compact for Safe is another instrument, international instrument to help climate refugees, to assist climate refugees, and it was created to respond for a urgent situation of migrants displaced because of climate change in Asia, and is addressed to the challenges of migration movement in the context of sudden onsets and slow onset natural disaster. More recently, in May of this year, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Migrants announced that its forthcoming report to the last General Assembly, which opened on September 30, is dedicated to the issues of the impact of climate change in the protection of the human rights of the migrants. So we have also in the international dimension, a dimension of the United Nations for Refugees Agency, who released a statement titled Legal Consideration Regarding Claims for International Protection made in the context of the adverse effects of climate change and disaster in the October of the 2020. And the document states that people feeling in the context of the adverse effect of climate change and disaster may have valid claims for refugee status under the convention, the Geneva Convention. This paper is a very important step in the protection of climate refugees because for the first time we talked about recognizing a legal instrument to help climate refugees for the international law. So it's very, very, very important. This is the overview about the international instrument to protect climate refugees. We have also other view, regional responses, and for example, the United Nations Agency for Refugees suggests that since it is the role of states to widen the definition of refugee status, the push to address climate-induced migration must come from individual states or regional coalition. It's important for the United Nations to recognize the primary responsibility lies with states for preventing displacement when possible, and when it cannot be avoided, for protecting displaced people, as well as finding durable solution for their displacement. So the several regional mechanisms and framework are also created by the convention, the Refugee Convention, and its protocol. And this is another chance to help these people. And also the Organization of Africa Unity create a regional instrument to recognize the African refugees moved by displaced by climate change, like climate refugees. We have at last the other solution, the individual responses. So several Latin American countries have incorporated the border refugee definition of the Cartagena Declaration into their national law or practices. For example, Mexico passed the law on refugees, complementary protection and political asylum, which includes the Cartagena refugees definition and provide protection for humanitarian reason to people, protection for humanitarian reason to individuals fleeing disaster in their country of the origins. It is unclear how often individuals displaced by climate change are able to obtain protection in Mexico, but during the Haitian earthquake, Mexico offered protection for these people and for these people affected by the disaster, the natural disaster. Another country is the Argentina, who included the Cartagena Declaration in this year, in 2022, and took a significant step toward the protection of individuals displaced by environmental disaster. The country recently announced a special humanitarian visa to facilitate regular admissions of individuals from Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean who are fleeing social natural disaster for a period of 3 years. This step, so it's very, very significant, as these regions have been gravely affected by climate change. Extreme weather events such as torrential rain and flooding followed by land floods have already affected 2.2 million people in the region, known as dry corridor, comprising into Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. So for that reason, the other solution is to include the Cartagena Declaration in the at the national level, in the small level. So the other important history is the history of the New Zealand. And New Zealand operates a labor migration scheme with the island nation of Fiji, Tonga, Tuvalu, and Kiribati through an agreement known as the Pacific Access Category. The agreements are small in scale, only 100 people each from Fiji and Tonga and Tuvalu and Kiribati are accepted each year, but they still represent a solution to people who want to migrate or need to migrate for a climate problem. In New Zealand, in the past, considered developing experimental humanitarian visas for Pacific Islanders affected by climate change, and they were never implemented as Pacific Islanders wanted to avoid the stigma of refugee status and asked the New Zealand government to reduce emission, provide other legal migration pathways, and support adaptation efforts. So lastly, the United States does not have a federal framework to address climate indices, the displacement. There are some provisions that offer protection to migrants fleeing disaster. such as temporary process status and deferred enforced departure, which allow individuals who are already present in USA to stay in the country because of ongoing conflicts or environmental disaster, among the factors in their country of the origins. So there are three types of these level of response. So international, regional, and individual. It's very clear that the solution now are in the hand of the law and lawyer and in the judging session. And there are also a very important step by the European Union with the action plan of the integration and inclusion, which the European Union launched the project climate change, including migration, which aim to highlight the role of climate change in the dynamic of the migration, not only in the Africa, but in the migration around the world. So the European Union, in the inside of the European Union, we have a debate about the climate, the protection of climate refugees, but also still without a solution and a low solution and international solution. There are in this slide other solutions, and for example, invest in innovative data collection and monitoring data. Is the only key to have the overview of the phenomena of climate refugees in climate migration and data in this type of about the climate migration are very difficult to obtain, because people, the migrants people, when start the trip, start a trip for a climate change problem, but the trip are very long. So when people come to the other states, for example, in Spain or Italy or Greece or I don't know, in the Mediterranean country, he worked for a long time, and don't talk about the climate change problem who lived in their states. So the climate change problem who said to people to go out to their country. So for that reason, the collection and the monitoring of countries and the collection data are very important. Another important suggestion is to focus on risk reduction, because planned relocation is done in an inclusive and transparent manner. But Pakistan, for example, decided to relocate all people who lived in a zone with high risk of flooding from glacial lake and outburst. But it's important to put the money in risk reduction. The other solution is to also recognize links between conflicts and climate change, like Syrian episode who talked a lot, like a Syrian conflict. And the other important aspect is to put the communities at center of the action, because it's very important to, when we talk about climate refugees, to go in the communities, to work with communities. I worked and I lived in the Arctic region with the climate refugees of the Arctic region, and I saw the climate change, how much climate change affects these people in the Arctic. The Arctic climate refugees are more silent climate refugees, because people of Arctic, because international report don't talk about people of Arctic, because people of Arctic, this is a very misunderstanding, are people think the people of Arctic are nomad people, but it's not true, because we have a city, and the climate change and the ice melt so the ice melt, the ice melting, it's a very important reason for climate migration for these people in these countries. Also, I say in the in the Ecuador, in the Latin America, and in the Ecuador, the climate change are very old, are very hard effects, and people are not really protected, for example, in Ecuador, from a law, an internal law, and a local law, but we have a lot of people who stay in the north of the Ecuador, because people because in the south of Ecuador it's not possible to have agriculture. We don't have water, we don't have food. It's very difficult to live. The last, but not the more, but the last and the more important solution is the creation of a new UN convention, or a ad hoc fund, because to protect climate refugees, because to have a instrument to protect forever, a instrument to protect the climate refugees, it's very important today. And we need an instrument to protect the climate refugees, but today around the world we had the political situation are not very good. So open a process to going to modify the Geneva Convention is very difficult, and it's difficult also for the rights of the climate refugee, of migrants, who migrants have today. But for that reason, it's important to create a new convention, also created for climate refugees, and for people who migrate for problem, for environmental problem. So the final solution is also to create a fund created by the United Nations states, who help people and countries who live the condition of climate change, to help these people, and to help these people to have a rights to live, and human rights. So the last is now in 3 days. We started COP27 in Egypt, Me personal will be there. So I want to be there, but for the situation, the political situation of Egypt about human rights, for me, it's not too sure, too much sure to stay in Egypt at the COP27. But I have a question: what should we expect on climate change and migration at this year's COP? So it's there are a lot of questions. I think at this COP we don't talk a lot. We don't talk. Doesn't mean progress isn't happening, because the Egypt states create a COP also to discuss about finance and climate finance, and to create an instrument for a Glasgow Pact of the past year, but we don't have a possibility to talk about climate justice, to talk about climate refugees in this COP, in the COP27. Personally, in the COP26 in Glasgow, in the last COP, I worked in a table about climate justice, and I talked and I worked to introduce in the Glasgow Pact the climate refugees, the little recognized of climate refugees, and this is a real story. We had a very important issues, because until the final day in the Glasgow Pact of the COP27, we had a little a part dedicated to climate refugees, but at last time we canceled the part of about climate refugees, because China and other countries have to eliminate this part. So the COP is still to start, but in this COP, the Convention about Climate Change, we don't have a solution for climate migration, for climate refugees, and in conclusion, moving forward, whatever at the international, regional, or individual country level, it is important that collective efforts include climate resilient policies, response that are inclusive, and provide target of investment and developmental assistance for the countries and regions most impacted by climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you very much. I think it was a very complete and rich lesson on a topic that, of course, I said at the beginning, raises so many issues and concerns from a legal, but also, of course, a political point of view. And I see that there are some questions and comments also, I would say, in the Q&A chat. Shall we want to go through the questions and try to to have a discussion around these, because I don't know if there are proper answers to at least to some of the questions posed by.
So Kylie asked, for example, about the COP27, and so I don't know if you ask before or after, but I talked about in the COP27 there were more fossil fuels lobbyists than delegates from any country. It's real, but also we have a lot of delegates talking about climate justice, like me. And for this year, it's very difficult to know about the results of the COP27. But okay, just let's see. But I think so. My opinion are very negative about this COP, and also I'm not really positive about the result of this COP. There are another question of Kyle, and you ask if the UNFCCC is required to hold to IPCC methodology, which has been held outside not by scientists and classic economists. Okay, so if this no binding agreement that the UNFCCC is the best thing we have to respond to looming extinction, what's up to do refugees? So it's a very good question. I don't know, but I think the solution are to make lobbying and to create a lobbying movement for climate refugees, because in the European Union, the lobbying work, the lobbyist work is very negative. People think in negative, but I was in past lobbies of climate of Amnesty International, and every NGO had a lobbyist, and I think it's very important to have lobbying movement to recognize the climate refugees around the world, and to move on the UNFCCC. For example, this is a real example. When I worked in Spain, in Cadiz, we make a lobbying about the phenomenon of porteadoras, of a woman who suffer in the border between Europe and Morocco, suffer human violation. We make a very important work of lobbying in the European Commission and the European institutions. So is worked, and so I think it's important to go for this way. So another question of Luca. Luca asked if there have been any national courts of authorities have recognized the climate refugees, like on the basis of national protection. No, we don't have any countries who recognized the climate refugees about on the basis of national protection. But for example, in Italy, we recognized one person, one climate migrants, Indian person. So 8 years ago. But it was for a instrument, a legal instrument, and based on international law, and not international and diplomatic law, but not internal law, not national law.
Can I add something on this, Andrea?
Yes,
Just
please.
I agree. As far as I know, there are not decisions, court decision or administrative decisions that recognized international protection on the basis of I don't know, national provisions or internal legislation. But for example, Italy, the Italian legal order provides a specific form of protection, which is not part, of course, of let's say, the international protection regime, but somehow completes the set of internal provisions that provides protection to migrant people in need of a form of protection, which is the Article 20 bis of the Italian immigration law, which is a specific provision for people fleeing from natural disasters, calamities and stuff like that. But so far, this provision hasn't been applied in practice. So it's still on papers. And I would say it's a good thing, because usually, at least in Italy, people fleeing from very severe natural disasters and calamities get a different protection that used to be called humanitarian protection before 2018, and that is now called special protection. We'll have a lesson on these in the second module, which is much better and is let's say, a stronger form of protection. I just wanted to add this.
Yeah.
Italian peculiarity, at least.
Yeah. Okay. So I think there are the Luna. Can the persistent lack of recognition of climate change by the international system explain this lack of legal recognition of climate refugee status? Yeah, I think so. Because the history of the recognition of climate change is very it's a long history, and also today we still no listen the help no listen the guideline of the scientists report. So for that reason, I think if we don't start we don't start to recognize the climate change and the effects of climate change, it's not possible to recognize the effects of climate change. And also, if we don't recognize, for example, the extreme weather, it's not normal. We don't open the mind to the possibility to protect and help people who suffer from climate change effects. So I think it's very connected, the situation. So I think so. So I think the last, no, because there are okay. So
I think that these two questions by Kyle are connected, are like focusing on...
this is about the solution. Yeah, about the solution. So Kylie, it's important it's important voting to help to create a institution, a very strong institution who recognize the climate change effects and climate change protection, climate refugees protection. And also we have a lot of solution to make just now the creation of movement, of local movement to help institution to work in this field and to recognize the climate change. The climate refugees are very, very important thing to implement now and to implement in very, very short time. So voting, studying a lot about climate migration, and create maybe a process to recognize the climate refugees. So
I wanted to add just a quick thought about the first question Kyle posed. I agree that there are no such, let's say, possibilities of reform at the European level to